There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a blanket. You don't recognize them as watersheds until much later, when you look back and see the landscape of your life cleaved in two, the time before and the time after. For me, that moment was the precise instant Liam's breathing deepened into the slow, rhythmic cadence of sleep, his head resting not on a pillow, but in the fragile space between my shoulder and my chest. His hand, which had been resting loosely on his own stomach, had uncurled in his sleep and was now settled, palm down, over my heart. I could feel the faint, residual warmth of his skin through the thin cotton of my shirt, a point of contact that seemed to burn with the intensity of a brand. It was a simple thing. A friend, exhausted and emotionally bruised, falling asleep on another friend after a long talk and too many bad movies. On the surface, it was nothing. It was an event so platonic in its architecture that to assign it any other meaning felt like a deliberate act of vandalism, a desecration of the easy, uncomplicated trust we had built over 5 years. But my heart, which was currently trapped beneath the gentle pressure of his hand, was staging a full-scale rebellion against that logic. It hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat that I was terrified would wake him. I held my breath, counting the seconds, trying to will my body into the same state of placid stillness that he had achieved. But it was useless. Every nerve ending was alight, every sense tuned to the infinitesimal details of his presence. The scent of his shampoo, a faint mix of sandalwood and something clean, like fresh linen, the soft whisper of his exhalations against my neck, the almost imperceptible weight of his arm across my torso. This was the line. I had spent years navigating the careful geography of our friendship, acutely aware of the borders I could not cross. I was the cartographer of my own longing, drawing precise, inviolable boundaries around my feelings, creating a map that kept me safe within the borders of platonic affection. I had become an expert at it. I could sit next to him, shoulder to shoulder, and feel nothing but the simple comfort of companionship. I could watch him laugh, a loud, uninhibited bark of a laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and feel only a swell of genuine, friendly happiness for him. I had built these walls so carefully, brick by painful brick, that I had almost convinced myself they were part of the original structure, that this carefully managed distance was all I had ever wanted. But here he was, sleeping on the other side of my defenses, his unconscious presence dismantling my life's work without even trying. This, I knew, even then, in the flickering blue light of the television's silent screen, was the after, and I had no idea how to live in it. Our story, like most, didn't begin with a tremor that threatened to bring the whole world down. It started with something far more mundane, a shared photography class in our second year of university. I was there because it was my major, my entire world condensed into shutter speeds and apertures, the quiet magic of capturing a fleeting moment in a frame of silver gelatin. Liam was there because he needed an arts credit to round out a schedule otherwise crammed with the unforgiving logic of computer science and advanced calculus. He was, to put it mildly, out of his element. He was loud where the darkroom demanded silence, clumsy where it required delicate precision, and his mind, so adept at navigating the clean, binary world of code, struggled with the subjective chaos of composition and light. He was a force of nature, a cheerful hurricane in our quiet, light-sensitive ecosystem, and from a safe distance, I found him endlessly fascinating. I was the opposite. I moved through the world as if trying not to leave footprints. I spoke in low tones, preferred observing to participating, and found my truest form of expression in the silent language of images. My camera was a shield, a license to stare, to witness life without having to be fully immersed in its messy, unpredictable currents. Liam was all current. He was the kind of person who seemed to generate his own gravity, pulling people into his orbit with an effortless charm. He made friends easily, laughed loudly, and moved with a casual, athletic grace that spoke of a life spent on soccer fields and basketball courts. not hunched over developing trays in a dimly lit room. We were, by any measure, an unlikely pair. Oil and water, shadow and sunlight. Our friendship began not with a spark, but with a slow, pragmatic leak. His enlarger was constantly malfunctioning, and I, having spent countless hours coaxing the department's ancient equipment into submission, was the only one who seemed to know its particular set of mechanical incantations. He would call me over in a frustrated whisper, gesturing at a print that was too dark, too light, or mysteriously blurred. I would quietly adjust a dial, tighten a loose screw, or gently explain the relationship between time and light, and he would watch, his usual boisterous energy subdued into a state of genuine curiosity. He started calling me the photo whisperer. He'd save me a seat, ask for my opinion on his contact sheets, and slowly, the space between us began to fill with a comfortable silence, then with quiet conversations, and eventually, with the easy back and forth of a genuine connection. He learned that my quietness was not a sign of disinterest, but of attention. I learned that his loudness was not a display of arrogance, but of an uncontainable, almost childlike enthusiasm for life. He was fascinated by the way I saw the world, the way I could find beauty in a peeling brick wall or the pattern of light filtering through a dusty window. I was mesmerized by the way he lived in it, with a fearless, head-on momentum that I could only dream of. He would describe the elegant logic of a piece of code, his hands sketching invisible patterns in the air, and I would see the same creative spark that I felt when composing a photograph. We found a strange, unexpected symmetry in our differences. He anchored me to the vibrant, chaotic present, and I, in turn, offered him a space of quiet contemplation, a refuge from the constant forward motion of his own life. My feelings for him were a slow-developing photograph, an image emerging gradually in the chemical bath of our growing friendship. At first, it was just an indistinct blur of admiration and affection, the kind you feel for any close friend. I loved his loyalty, his unwavering optimism, his surprisingly gentle heart. But then, small details began to come into focus. The way he'd absent-mindedly run a hand through his thick, dark hair when he was concentrating. The specific shade of green in his eyes when he was laughing. The way he would seek me out in a crowded room, his face breaking into a wide, uncomplicated grin when our eyes met. These were the tiny points of light that, when collected together, began to form a picture I could no longer deny. I was in love with my best friend. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of love, the kind that thrives in silence and shadow. I accepted it as a fundamental, unchangeable part of my internal landscape, like a mountain range I had to learn to live with. It was beautiful and vast, but ultimately impassable. He was, after all, Liam. Liam, who dated a succession of bright, cheerful women who mirrored his own sunny disposition. Liam, who spoke of his future in terms of a wife and kids with the same casual certainty he used when discussing his career goals. Liam, who had never given me any indication that he saw me as anything other than his quiet, reliable photographer friend. To confess my feelings would be an act of self-immolation. It would not just be a rejection. It would be a fundamental rewriting of our history, a shattering of the very foundation on which our friendship was built. He wouldn't understand. It would make him uncomfortable, awkward, and our easy camaraderie would be replaced by a strained, cautious politeness. I would lose him, and that was a price I was absolutely unwilling to pay. So I buried it. I packed the feeling away in a lead-lined box and stored it in the deepest, most inaccessible corner of my heart, and I became a masterful actor in the play of our friendship. After we graduated, we found ourselves adrift in the same city, clinging to each other as the one point of stability in the uncertain waters of post-college life. Rent was astronomical, so pooling our resources seemed like the most logical solution. We found a small, slightly run-down two-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and a magnificent view of a brick wall. It became our sanctuary. For 5 years, we built a life within those walls. We navigated job losses and promotions, bad dates and serious relationships, family dramas, and personal triumphs. I photographed his life, and he debugged mine. He was the constant, the fixed point in my universe. My love for him remained, a low, steady hum beneath the surface of our shared lives, a truth I acknowledged only in the privacy of my own thoughts. I had accepted my role. I was the keeper of his stories, the quiet observer of his life, the friend who would always be there. It was a painful peace, but it was peace nonetheless, and I thought it would last forever. The shift began not with an earthquake, but with a series of small, almost imperceptible tremors. It started the autumn after his breakup with Sarah. It had been his longest relationship, a 2-year affair that everyone, including me, had assumed was heading toward marriage. Her departure was sudden and, for him, completely unexpected. She had packed her things while he was on a business trip, leaving behind nothing but a short, brutal note on the kitchen counter and an apartment that was suddenly, cavernously empty of her presence. Liam, who had always weathered life's storms with a resolute, almost infuriating optimism, was completely undone. The force of nature was, for the first time, becalmed in the worst possible way. He didn't talk about it, not really. He was a processor of facts and logic, not the messy, intangible data of emotions. So instead of talking, he just stopped. He stopped going out with his work friends. He stopped his weekend soccer games. He stopped filling the apartment with his booming laughter and his terrible taste in music. The vibrant energy that had always been his defining characteristic seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted quiet that was far more unsettling than my own ever had been. He would come home from work, drop his bag by the door, and just sit on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. The silence in our apartment, once a shared comfort, became heavy, freighted with everything he couldn't say. My role, as always, was to observe, to be present without being intrusive. I made sure there was food in the fridge. I took over his share of the chores without comment. I would sit with him in the living room, reading or editing photos on my laptop, creating a perimeter of quiet companionship around his grief. I was offering him the only comfort I knew how to give, the steady, undemanding presence of a friend. I expected him to retreat into himself, to build his own walls as he healed. But instead, he began to lean on me, not just emotionally, but physically. It was a subtle, almost unconscious drift, a slow gravitational pull I was powerless to resist. It started with small, insignificant invasions of my personal space. We'd be on the couch watching a movie, and his foot would come to rest against mine. Or we'd be cooking in our tiny kitchen, and he would stand just a little too close, his arm brushing against my back as he reached for a spice. At first, I dismissed them as accidents, the simple byproducts of sharing a small space. I would flinch internally, my body reacting with a jolt of alarm and something else, something I refused to name, and then I would force myself to relax, to treat the contact with the same casual indifference he seemed to. Nothing to see here, just two friends coexisting. But the incidents grew more frequent and less accidental. He was seeking proximity, closing the carefully maintained distance between us in a way he never had before. Then came the nights. He had trouble sleeping. He confessed it to me one evening, his voice low and rough, that he would lie awake for hours, his mind replaying every moment of his time with Sarah, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong. The bedroom they had shared was now his alone, and the emptiness of it, he said, was deafening. He started leaving his bedroom door open, not just a crack, but wide open. It was a silent invitation, a signal I struggled to interpret. Was it a simple byproduct of loneliness, a subconscious desire for the comforting sound of another person breathing in the apartment? Or was it something more? A plea? An offering? My mind, a relentless engine of analysis, turned the question over and over, examining it from every possible angle, but could find no definitive answer. It was a gesture suspended in the ambiguous space between friendship and something else, and it tormented me. The first time he fell asleep on the couch with me, it felt like the culmination of this slow, tectonic shift. We had been watching some mindless action movie, a welcome distraction of explosions and car chases. He had been quiet all evening, but it was a softer, less wounded silence than before. At some point, he had stretched out, his head ending up on the armrest at his end of the couch, his long legs tangled with a throw blanket. I was acutely aware of him, the way I always was, but I kept my eyes glued to the screen, pretending an interest in the film I didn't feel. I don't know when he drifted off. I only know that I looked over during a commercial break and found him asleep. His face, usually so animated, was completely relaxed, his mouth slightly parted. He looked younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. A powerful, protective instinct washed over me, so fierce it almost took my breath away. I wanted to smooth the worried crease between his eyebrows, to pull the blanket up over his shoulders. I did neither. I just sat there, frozen, until the movie ended and the credits rolled in silence. I eventually got up, turned off the television, and went to my own bed, leaving him there. It felt like both a kindness and a betrayal. The ritual began, as most habits do, by accident. A few nights after he first fell asleep on the couch, it happened again. This time, however, he had shifted in his sleep, his head slipping from the armrest and landing, with a soft thud, onto my thigh. My entire body went rigid. It was the most intimate, non-sexual contact we had ever shared, and it felt like a lightning strike. My first instinct was to move, to gently dislodge him and retreat to the safety of my own room. But I couldn't. I looked down at his sleeping face, at the way his dark eyelashes rested against his cheek, and I was paralyzed by a tidal wave of emotions. Terror, tenderness, and a deep, aching longing that I had suppressed for so long it felt like a physical pain. So I stayed. I sat there for over an hour, my leg cramping, my heart pounding a frantic, unsteady rhythm, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows. When he finally stirred, he blinked up at me, his eyes clouded with sleep, and offered a mumbled, confused apology before stumbling off to his own bed. He didn't mention it the next morning, and neither did I. We let the incident sink beneath the surface of our daily lives, an unspoken, unacknowledged thing. But it had happened. A line had been crossed, a new precedent set, and a week later, it happened again. This time, it felt less like an accident and more like an unspoken arrangement. We settled onto the couch for our nightly ritual of cinematic distraction, and as the opening credits rolled, he simply laid his head in my lap. He did it without preamble, without asking permission, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He adjusted himself for a moment, then let out a soft sigh, his body relaxing into my own. I didn't breathe. I just stared straight ahead at the screen, my hands resting stiffly on my own knees, terrified to move a muscle. He was offering me a level of trust, of physical intimacy, that he had never offered me before, and I had no idea what to do with it. My mind was a battlefield. One part of me, the cautious, self-protective part, was screaming at me to put a stop to it, to re-establish the boundaries before they were eroded completely. This was dangerous territory. It was a temporary comfort for him, born of loneliness and grief. But for me, it was a slow, exquisite form of torture. It was feeding a hope I had worked so hard to starve. But the other part of me, the part that had loved him in silence for years, was overwhelmed with a devastating tenderness. He was hurting, and he had chosen me as his harbor. He had sought me out for comfort, for a sense of safety that he apparently couldn't find anywhere else. How could I deny him that? How could I push him away when he was so clearly adrift? So I stayed silent. I let him sleep. And as the minutes bled into hours, a strange sort of peace settled over my anxiety. My hand, of its own accord, moved from my knee and came to rest on his back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing beneath my palm. It was a simple, platonic gesture of comfort. At least, that's what I told myself. But my heart knew it was a lie. It was a confession. This became our new normal. 2 or 3 nights a week, we would end up on the couch, and he would use me as his pillow. It was a silent, choreographed routine. We never spoke of it. In the bright, unforgiving light of day, we were the same as we had always been, roommates, best friends. We talked about work, about groceries, about the leaky faucet that the landlord still hadn't fixed. We were Liam and Julian, an established entity, a fixed point. But at night, in the flickering, intimate glow of the television, we became something else entirely. The carefully constructed walls of my self-control began to crumble, eroded by the constant, gentle pressure of his proximity. I learned the exact weight of his head in my lap, the particular scent of his hair after a shower. I learned to distinguish the soft sigh of contentment from the shuddering breath that signaled a bad dream. I became a scholar of his sleeping form, an expert in the silent language of his unconscious body. The anxiety, however, never fully subsided. It was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of the tenderness. I was living on a knife's edge, caught between the profound comfort of his presence and the terrifying possibility of what it all meant. Or, more accurately, what it didn't mean. I was his human security blanket, a temporary solace until he was ready to face the world again. I was a place, not a person, a means to an end. The thought was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I would watch him sleep and wonder what was going on inside his head. Was he thinking of Sarah? Was he dreaming of a future that looked nothing like this? Was I just a convenient, warm body in the absence of the one he really wanted? Each touch was a paradox, a source of both exquisite pleasure and profound pain. I was drowning in ambiguity, and every night I let him pull me deeper under. I tried, on several occasions, to break the cycle. I would invent reasons to go to my room early, claiming fatigue or an early morning. But he would look at me with such a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, a brief, unguarded expression of loneliness, that my resolve would shatter. His unspoken need was a magnet, and I was made of iron. I couldn't say no to him. It was my greatest strength as a friend and my most fatal flaw as a man in love. So the ritual continued, and the lines between us grew blurrier with each passing week. The space on the couch became a sacred, terrifying territory, a liminal space where the rules of our friendship no longer seemed to apply. I was living a double life, the dependable friend by day, and the silent keeper of this fragile, dangerous intimacy by night. I knew it was unsustainable. I knew it had to end. I just didn't know that he would be the one to finally set it on fire. The crossing happened on a Tuesday. I remember the day with a strange, photographic clarity. It had been raining all afternoon, a cold, persistent drizzle that had washed the city into a palette of muted grays and blues. The sound of the rain against our apartment windows was a soft, percussive rhythm, a soothing soundtrack to a quiet evening. Liam had been subdued all day, a deeper, more thoughtful quiet than his usual post-breakup melancholy. He had come home from work, changed into sweatpants and a worn university hoodie, and had barely said a word. We ate dinner in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the clinking of our forks and the drumming of the rain. I assumed it was just another one of his down days, another wave in the long, slow tide of his grief. We ended up on the couch, as we always did. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. The low murmur of some forgotten sitcom was just background noise, a filler for the space our own words were not occupying. He didn't lie down immediately. He just sat beside me, his shoulder pressed against mine, his gaze fixed on some indeterminate point across the room. The tension in the air was different tonight. It was thicker, heavier, charged with a strange, electric quality I couldn't name. I could feel the coiled energy in him, a sense of something being held back, a dam about to break. I kept my own body perfectly still, my breathing shallow, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile atmosphere. After what felt like an eternity, he turned his head to look at me. The ambient light from the television cast his face in a shifting pattern of blues and golds, highlighting the troubled expression in his eyes. They were dark, serious, and for the first time, they were looking at me not as a fixture, not as a comfortable piece of furniture, but as a person. He was really seeing me. "Julian," he said, and his voice was so low and rough it was almost a whisper. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Yeah," I managed to reply, my own voice sounding thin and unsteady to my ears. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just held my gaze, And in that silence, I felt as if he were reading every secret I had ever kept, every unspoken word, every carefully concealed feeling. It was terrifying and, in a strange way, liberating. The air crackled. The rain beat a little harder against the glass. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. His hand, which had been resting on the cushion between us, lifted. It moved slowly, hesitantly, through the charged space separating us. I watched its approach as if in slow motion, my heart hammering against my ribs. His fingers were trembling. It was a minute, almost imperceptible tremor, but in the hyper-aware state I was in, it was as loud as a shout. It was a confession of its own, a betrayal of the calm, confident facade he always wore. His hand came to rest on my knee, his touch gentle but firm, a point of anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. "Would it be okay," he began, his voice still a low, hesitant whisper, "if I kissed you?" The world stopped. The rain, the television, the hum of the city outside our window. It all faded away into a distant, muffled roar. There was only his question, hanging in the air between us, a fragile, impossible thing. It was not a proposition. It was not a casual suggestion. It was a plea. It was a question freighted with so much fear and vulnerability that it stole the breath from my lungs. This was it. The moment I had simultaneously dreamed of and dreaded for years. The precipice. And I had a choice. I could retreat. I could laugh it off as a joke. I could pretend he meant something else. I could preserve the friendship, the safe, painful peace I had worked so hard to maintain. Or I could jump. I looked from his earnest, terrified eyes down to the hand on my knee. I saw the slight tremor in his knuckles, the tension in his grip. This was costing him something. This was not a whim. This was a seismic event, a fundamental shift in the landscape of his own understanding of himself. And in that moment, all my fear, all my carefully constructed defenses, washed away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy and a fierce, protective love. He was scared, and he was reaching for me anyway. I didn't answer with words. I couldn't. I simply nodded, a small, jerky movement. It was all the permission he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every possible opportunity to pull away. His eyes never left mine until the last possible second, and then they fluttered closed. His lips met mine with a feather-light touch, a soft, hesitant pressure that was more question than statement. It was not a kiss of passion or of pent-up desire. It was a kiss of discovery. It was tentative, gentle, and achingly sweet. It tasted of rain and fear and of fragile, burgeoning hope. I lifted my own hand and placed it against his cheek, my thumb stroking the rough stubble along his jawline. I could feel the frantic pulse beating in his neck, a perfect match to my own. I tilted my head, deepening the kiss ever so slightly, and a soft, broken sound escaped his throat. It was the sound of a wall coming down. It was the sound of surrender. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back slowly, his forehead coming to rest against mine. His eyes, when he opened them, were wide and searching, filled with a maelstrom of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Confusion, relief, and a profound, bone-deep terror. His hand was still on my knee, but now his other hand came up to grip my shoulder, as if he needed to hold on to me to keep from being swept away. We stayed like that for a long time, breathing the same air, our heartbeats slowly returning to a normal rhythm. The only sound was the gentle, insistent patter of the rain. The irreversible had happened. We had crossed the border, and there was no going back. I had no idea what came next, but as I looked into his terrified, honest eyes, I knew, for the first time in years, that I was no longer standing on the edge of the precipice alone. The aftermath was not the gentle unfolding I had hoped for, but a slow, silent implosion. The morning after the kiss felt like waking up in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. The air in our apartment was thick with unspoken words, heavy with the memory of what had passed between us. Liam was a ghost. He was physically present, moving through our shared space with a tense, guarded caution, but he was emotionally absent. He avoided my eyes. He manufactured reasons to be busy, his fingers tapping furiously on his laptop, his voice a clipped, professional monotone on a series of work calls that seemed entirely too urgent for a Wednesday morning. The easy, comfortable silence we had once shared was gone, replaced by a strained, humming void that crackled with anxiety. He was building a wall between us, brick by careful, silent brick. Every polite, impersonal question about my day, every quick, non-committal answer, every time he chose to stand on the opposite side of the kitchen instead of next to me. It was another layer of mortar. I watched him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, and I felt a familiar, sickening sense of dread. I had been right all along. I had misinterpreted everything. The late-night cuddling, the shared intimacy, the vulnerable question, it had all been a mistake. An anomaly born of his grief and loneliness. An experiment he now deeply regretted. I had allowed myself a brief, intoxicating moment of hope, and now I was paying the price. The pain of it was sharper, more acute than the dull ache of my years of silent longing. This was the agony of something given and then immediately taken away. That evening, he didn't come home from work at his usual time. A text message appeared on my phone around 7. Gonna grab a drink with the guys from work. Don't wait up. It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. He had never been one for spontaneous after-work drinks, not since his breakup. He was running. He was putting distance between us, both physical and emotional. I ate dinner alone, the silence of the apartment amplifying the frantic, panicked monologue in my head. I had ruined it. I had let him cross a line, and in doing so, I had shattered the one thing I couldn't bear to lose, our friendship. The foundation was cracked, and I could feel the whole structure of our shared life threatening to collapse. He came home late, well after midnight. I was in my bed, pretending to be asleep, listening to the sound of his key in the lock. He moved through the apartment with a practiced, drunken quiet, trying not to wake me. I heard the soft click of his bedroom door closing, a sound that felt as final and definitive as a gunshot. In all the years we had lived together, through all his moods and struggles, he had never closed his door. Not completely. It was a statement, a boundary line drawn thick and dark. The open door had been a symbol of his vulnerability, of his need for connection. The closed door was a fortress, and I was on the outside. This pattern of avoidance continued for 3 agonizing days. It was a masterclass in polite estrangement. We were roommates sharing a space, not friends sharing a life. We spoke of trivialities, the weather, the need for milk, whose turn it was to take out the recycling. Every conversation was a carefully navigated minefield, designed to avoid any mention of the cataclysmic event that had occurred on our couch. The couch itself became a piece of damning evidence, a crime scene we both refused to look at directly. We no longer spent our evenings there. I would retreat to my room with a book, and he would stay glued to his desk, the blue light from his monitor spilling out from under his closed door. The apartment, once our shared sanctuary, now felt like a demilitarized zone, partitioned by an invisible, impassable wall. I was oscillating between a deep, gut-wrenching hurt and a slow-burning anger. I was hurt that he could so easily discard what had felt so profound, but I was angry at his cowardice. He had initiated it. He had asked the question. He had been the one to lean in. And now he was treating me like a stranger, punishing me for a crime we had committed together. The silence was becoming more painful than any argument could ever be. It was a festering wound, and I knew that if I didn't do something, it would poison everything we had ever been to each other. I had to break it. I had to force the confrontation he was so desperate to avoid. On the 4th night, I waited for him. I sat on the couch, the one we had been avoiding, and I waited. When he came home, he stopped short in the doorway of the living room, his bag still slung over his shoulder, his face a mask of surprise and apprehension. He looked like a cornered animal. "Hey," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Working late?" "No," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. "I was waiting for you. We need to talk, Liam." A flicker of panic crossed his face. "Look, Julian, I'm really tired. Can this wait?" "No," I said, the single word hanging in the air, sharp and unyielding. It can't. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation of defeat. He dropped his bag by the door and walked slowly into the room, but he didn't sit down. He stood by the armchair, keeping a safe distance, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. He wouldn't look at me. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "What's changed? Talk to me." He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Nothing's changed. I've just been busy with work. It's been a crazy week." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, that it broke through my carefully controlled calm. "Don't do that," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Don't lie to me. Not after everything. We've been living like ghosts for days. You won't look at me. You're hiding in your room. What was Tuesday night, Liam? Was it a mistake? Was it a joke? Because if it was, you need to have the courage to say it to my face." He flinched as if I had struck him. He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a raw, desperate turmoil. He looked lost. "It wasn't a mistake," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know what it was." "Then why are you doing this?" I pressed, my frustration mounting. "Why are you pushing me away?" And then it came out, in a rushed, panicked torrent of words. "Because I'm scared, okay? I'm terrified. I don't know what's happening. One minute, everything makes sense, and the next, nothing does. You're my best friend, Julian. You're the most important person in my life. And I broke it. I broke the one good thing I had left. You think kissing me broke us?" I asked, the question laced with a pain I couldn't hide. "I don't know," he exclaimed, his voice raw with anguish. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his ultimate tell for distress. "It's not supposed to be like this. I'm not supposed to feel this way." "Feel what way?" I asked softly, my anger dissolving into a profound sadness for him, for both of us. He looked at me, his face a portrait of confusion and self-recrimination. "I don't know," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But when Sarah left, all I wanted was you. Not in that way, I didn't think. I just needed you. And sitting here with you at night, it was the only time my head would go quiet. It was the only time I felt safe. And then it changed. I started needing it. I started needing to be near you. And on Tuesday, looking at you, I wanted to. I wanted to kiss you more than I've wanted anything in a long time. And it felt right. And that's what's scaring the hell out of me." He finally sank into the armchair, his head in his hands. He was unraveling right in front of me. This confident, decisive man, who always knew exactly what he wanted, was completely lost at sea. And I was his only lighthouse, and he was terrified of the light. "It's okay to be scared," I said gently, moving from the couch to kneel on the floor in front of him. I hesitated for a second, then reached out and placed my hand on his knee, mirroring his own gesture from that fateful night. He didn't pull away. "But you can't shut me out. Whatever this is, we have to figure it out together. Hiding from it isn't going to make it go away." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But what if it changes everything? What if this ruins us?" he asked, his voice thick with fear. "I can't lose you, Julian. I can't." "You won't lose me," I said, my voice full of a conviction I didn't entirely feel. "But we can't go back to the way things were. That door is closed. We have to decide which one to open next." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of 5 years of friendship and one night of terrifying, beautiful honesty. He was at a crossroads, and I knew I couldn't choose the path for him. He had to walk it himself. His hand, which was resting on his own leg, was trembling again. That same slight, almost imperceptible tremor that I had seen before the kiss. It was the tell. It was the truth his words were too afraid to speak. His fear was real, but so was the feeling that caused it. He was shaking not from regret, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of a truth he had never expected to face. He finally took a deep, shuddering breath, and his hand moved, covering mine. His grip was tight, desperate. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a declaration. But it was a start. It was an agreement to stop running. It was the first, tentative step onto a new, uncertain path, a path we would have to navigate together, in the beautiful, honest, and terrifying silence we had finally learned to create. The resolution was not a sudden sunrise, but a slow, hesitant dawn, breaking over a landscape that had been ravaged by a storm. The conversation had not magically fixed everything. It had simply cleared the wreckage, leaving us with the difficult, painstaking work of rebuilding. The days that followed were a delicate dance of advance and retreat. The wall between us was gone, but in its place was a vast, open space filled with a new kind of uncertainty. We were no longer just friends, but we were not yet something else. We were explorers in a new, uncharted territory, without a map or a compass, trying to find our bearings. The biggest change was the honesty. We started talking, not about the big, terrifying questions of identity and future, but about the small, immediate things. "Is it okay if I sit here?" he would ask before joining me on the couch, a question he had never needed to ask before. "Are you okay?" I would ask when I saw the familiar, troubled look cross his face. We were learning a new language, a vocabulary of consent and emotional check-ins that had never been part of our old dynamic. It was clumsy and awkward at times, but it was real. For the first time, the foundation we were building felt like it was made of stone, not sand. The physical intimacy returned, but it was different now. It was intentional. One evening, a week after our talk, we were on the couch, a careful, 6-inch cushion of space between us. The silence was comfortable again, but it was still missing the easy, unconscious closeness we had once shared. I could feel him wanting to bridge the gap, could see it in the tense set of his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing at me. Finally, he let out a frustrated sigh. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. Can we?" He gestured vaguely at my lap, the unfinished question hanging in the air. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little husky. "Yeah, Liam. Of course." The relief that flooded his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. He shifted, lying down and resting his head in my lap with a sense of deliberate purpose. It was not the exhausted, unconscious collapse of before. This was a choice. He sighed, a deep, contented sound, and his entire body seemed to relax, the tension draining out of him like air from a balloon. My hand, without the hesitation of before, went to his hair, my fingers gently carding through the thick, soft strands. He leaned into my touch, a silent affirmation. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. In that single, intentional act, we had said everything. We had acknowledged the need. We had given the permission, and we had found our way back to a comfort that was now built on truth instead of denial. The sleeping arrangements changed too. His bedroom door remained closed for a while, a lingering symbol of his fear. But one night, after he had fallen asleep on the couch and I had woken him gently to tell him he should go to bed, he had looked up at me, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Stay with me," he had whispered, the words so soft I almost thought I had imagined them. "In your room?" I asked, needing to be sure. He just nodded, his eyes pleading. He got up and walked to his room, leaving the door wide open behind him, an explicit invitation this time. I followed, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm of nervous anticipation. His room was neat, Spartan, still bearing the faint ghost of Sarah's presence in the form of a few books she had left behind on the nightstand. He climbed into bed and shifted over to one side, pulling back the covers for me. I hesitated for only a moment before sliding in beside him. The space felt enormous and impossibly small at the same time. We lay on our backs for a while, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, not touching. "Thank you," he said quietly into the darkness, "for not giving up on me." "Never," I replied, the word feeling more true than anything I had ever said. He rolled onto his side to face me, a dark silhouette in the dim light filtering in from the street. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. We fell asleep like that, hand in hand, and in the morning, I woke up to find myself wrapped in his arms, my head on his chest, his breathing a slow, even rhythm against my ear. It felt like coming home. It felt like a beginning. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together. The quiet that had once been a space for my secret longing, and then a chasm of his fear, was now a sanctuary for our shared vulnerability. It was in these quiet moments that our new relationship truly took root. Making coffee together in the morning, our bodies brushing past each other in the small kitchen without the old anxiety. Sitting on the fire escape on a warm evening, sharing a beer and watching the sunset, his knee pressed comfortably against mine. Me, in my makeshift darkroom in the second bathroom, with him sitting on the edge of the tub, just watching, not saying a word, simply content to be in my space, to witness the process of creation. These were the small, mundane bricks with which we rebuilt our world. We didn't label it, not for a long time. The words, boyfriend, partner, lover, felt too large, too formal for the soft, organic thing that was growing between us. We were simply Julian and Liam. But we were a new iteration, a different version of ourselves. The friendship was still there, the bedrock of everything we were, but now it was interwoven with something deeper, more tender. He started holding my hand in public, a simple, possessive gesture that sent a thrill of quiet joy through me every time. He started calling me on his way home from work, just to talk, his voice losing its professional edge and softening the moment he heard mine. He started looking at me with an open, unguarded affection that still had the power to take my breath away. He was learning to love me out loud, and I was learning to let myself be loved. The camera, which had once been my shield, a way to keep the world at a safe distance, became a bridge between us. I started taking pictures of him again, not as the observer of a life I couldn't fully be a part of, but as a participant. I captured him sleeping, the morning light tracing the curve of his spine. I captured him laughing, a genuine, uninhibited explosion of joy directed at me. I captured him in the quiet, in-between moments, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked, his face soft and contemplative as he read. My photographs were no longer about longing from a distance. They were a testament to the beauty of being close, a celebration of the intimacy I had once thought was impossible. And one day, looking at a print of him that I had just developed, a simple, quiet portrait of him looking directly into the lens, his eyes full of a soft, steady love, I realized the old, familiar ache in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by a profound, quiet sense of peace. The mountain I had lived with for so long had not been impassable after all. It had just been waiting for him to meet me at the summit. We had found our way, not by conquering the obstacle, but by learning to climb it together. And the view from the top, I discovered, was worth every terrifying, uncertain step of the journey. We had found our own kind of quiet, a language without words, a love that had finally found its voice.